cases over the weekend. What's just your overall opinion on the current status of the pandemic in Ottawa and in Ontario?
Man, it's pretty rough. I think this third wave might be the worst of the three. And we talk about waves. Usually they're driven by human behavior. Things get bad, we go back in our houses and hide. Things get better, we go back outside and intermingle, and things get worse again. And that tends to follow a wave-like pattern. This time around, it's driven by human behavior still, but also by the mechanism of the new variants, which, as everybody knows now, are hypertransmissible, possibly more lethal, and it looks like they're targeting a younger demographic. So it's like we're in a brand new pandemic as part of the existing pandemic.
And what have the measures that are currently introduced, because we're in a whole province-wide lockdown, is that effective in terms of the variants? Because it seemed to be kind of effective with the original strain of COVID, if you will. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a couple things here. First is in the UK, where they were beset by B.1.1.7, the so-called UK variant, they saw exponential growth even in lockdown, which suggests that the traditional mitigation tools might not be sufficient. So given that the current Ontario-wide restrictions are so tepid, it strikes me as an insufficient response for a new, more dire threat. So really, if you look at places like Toronto and Peel, the only thing new is that you can't eat in restaurants. Everything else is a go. Gyms are closed too, but churches are still open to some extent. Schools are still open. So without a stay-at-home order, I don't think this is going to achieve the desired result. If it does, it'll be a very temporary result. So we only have to live with these restrictions for a couple of months at the most. I know when I say only, that's hard for some people to hear because some people really are suffering through them. But we have to drive the numbers down to preserve the ICU capacity, or this entire house of cards crumbles. And unlike the previous waves, or the previous lockdowns, previous restrictions, where there wasn't an end in sight, this time there's an exit strategy. That exit strategy is vaccination. So the desire here, the goal here is to buy time to get shots into enough arms so this thing goes away for good.
And do you think the vaccination rollout is being targeted most appropriately to squash COVID as quickly as possible?
No, I don't. Now, had we had this conversation 2 months ago, I would have said, it looks like it's a well-positioned plan. You do it by age primarily. Like once you've got your healthcare workers immunized, then you take the over 90s, your over 80s, your over 70s. You get the people most likely to be hospitalized, and that way you reduce the toll as this thing unfolds. But the new variants have changed that formula, and the nature of the third wave has changed that dynamic as well. So what we're seeing is 10% of the postal codes are responsible for 90% of the cases in Ontario. We're seeing it predominantly target low-income neighborhoods, racialized populations, families with multiple generations living in one home, people who are our essential workers. So it makes complete sense to me to target this most rarest of commodities, this treatment, this prevention, this water on the fire, to where the fire burns the brightest. So that means directing most of the vaccines now to where the assault on this system is taking place. And especially for that population that cannot protect themselves and yet must continue to expose themselves. We're asking people to go to their factory jobs, to go to their Amazon warehouse jobs, to go to their teaching jobs, and yet we're not giving them the tools to protect themselves. So it strikes me that they must be a priority now.
Well, you basically summed up everything I wanted to discuss in under 5 minutes. So that's wonderful, and there was no interruptions too. So
great.
Yeah, is there anything else you want to add?
No, except this is I think people have to understand that this is not interminable. This is the final great big struggle of the pandemic for us in Ontario, probably, if we do everything right. If we do it poorly, we may have to do it again, before the summer, even during the summer. But we have to, buckle down, restrict our exposures, and just drive the cases down, get the shots into arms so that we can have a normal-ish summer, leading to a more normal fall, leading to a normal life at the end of the year. So we're ramping up towards normal. It just takes a couple of months of struggle now.
Well, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to chat with me.